As a hero who got his powers through the traumatic experience of being bitten by a radioactive spider, it makes perfect sense that Spider-Man's enemies also require wild backstories and strange powers in order to go toe-to-toe with the beloved arachnid prince. And in this regard, Spider-Man's rogues gallery doesn't disappoint. In fact, the various villains go above and beyond even the spookiest expectations, creating a collection of characters who could legitimately give you nightmares if you read their comics too early. Or if you read his comics when you're in your 20s like me and are still terrified of everything you see. Although they vary from being just gross to being downright horrific, it's always an interesting time to see these villains appear in any story. Generally because they take it from being a regular superhero comic to being a straight-up horror story. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are the 10 most disturbing Spider-Man villains. Number 10, Vermin. Now, while domesticated rats are generally quite sweet and lovable creatures, a wild rat still definitely triggers all of the caveman flight or fight responses in our brain every single time we see one. Anyway, said flight or fight response is decidedly more powerful when the rat is human-sized and trying to kill you, which is why Edward Whelan, also known by the slightly cruel supervillain name of Vermin, is so concerning. Turned into a rat-like creature by Nazi scientists, aka the worst kind of scientists, Vermin would also gain the power to control other beasts, although he would largely focus on controlling other rats. This means that were you ever unfortunate enough to cross paths with the man while he was enraged, you'd not only have to worry that a 200-pound rat was chasing after you, but that he'd also have tens to hundreds of other smaller rats with him. Just to add the proverbial horrific cherry on top though, Whelan's genetic splicing also gave him a thirst for human flesh, meaning he generally uses his powers to cannibalize people in brutal fashion. At least it doesn't happen to Spider-Man, I guess, or he'd be way up this list. Number 9, Los Lobos. As anyone who has taken some Spanish courses at some time in their life, or quickly Google translated a phrase 5 minutes before recording a voiceover likely knows, Los Lobos translates to the wolves. Or, in this case, werewolves, as the title belongs to a team of villainous lycanthropes, also known as the Lobo Cartel. While the cartel wouldn't usually be unnerving, after all, Spider-Man has taken on things much worse than a couple of anthropomorphic dogs, the Los Lobos are largely involved in human and drug trafficking, which has some absolutely nightmarish implications. And that's because the idea of a kidnapper who suddenly turns into a hulking, drooling monster when you try and escape is something straight out of a horror movie. Only made slightly better because at least then you have a slim chance that Spider-Man will realize and then come to your aid. Number 8. Doppelganger. Spider-Man's bizarre clone Doppelganger is an unnerving creature for two main reasons. Firstly, by all means, Doppelganger should be dead, as not only should he have died with the other Spider clones at the end of Infinity War, but he was also killed by the Hobgoblin and then brought back to life by the Demogoblin, which is exactly as complicated and exactly as weird as that chain of words suggests. So not only is Doppelganger kind of a zombie, but he's also one that seems single-mindedly focused on doing evil things whenever he can, helping summoning the symbiote equivalent of the devil, remorselessly killing, and doing anything else he can to maximize his villainous portfolio. Add to this the fact that the 8-limbed terror cannot speak but only hiss and click, and he's pretty much the poster boy for the spooky enemies that Spider-Man faces on the daily, especially since he looks exactly like Spidey's evil twin, sans the mustache. Number 7, Rhino. Unlike the majority of the villains on this list, Rhino is actually a very well-known criminal. However, it's well worth mentioning this more famous enemy of Spider-Man for one reason. He's secretly a really messed up character. Now, with enemies like the Green Goblin or the Lizard, you're always aware that they're more than a little disturbing, as it's generally the focus of their time on the page. On the other hand, since Rhino is generally just a big dumb goon for Spidey to beat up, he doesn't get this same kind of focus, which means it's really easy to miss certain aspects of his character and their awful implications. Said implications are best known in a short story known as Flowers for Rhino, playing off the title of a similar story found in the book Flowers for Algernon. In this, we discover that Rhino desperately wants to leave his life of crime behind, but he finds himself impeded by his lack of smarts. After trying an experimental surgery to make him smarter, however, he discovers he still finds the world cruel and almost commits suicide before having the surgery reversed and his memory of these events wiped. In essence, Rhino is a disturbing villain because he doesn't want to be one, and yet he finds himself forced into the role again and again and again. Number 6. Regent. Despite looking like the strange love child of Thanos and a toaster, as always there's no kink-shaming here of course, Regent is a legitimately scary villain. Partially because of his motivations, and partially because any villain who looks like the offspring of a Transformer and a bad goth has to be at least a little bit spooky. After his family died caught in a battle between the Avengers and the Masters of Evil, Augustus Roman would gain a lifelong hatred of superhumans, leading to him building the covert superhuman holding facility, the Cellar. Not only did the Cellar basically torture those held there, but it was also used to siphon the powers of those confined in it, which would be placed within a supersuit for Roman himself. And if an evil and disturbed billionaire who keeps a bunch of people in his basement to power his sweet new threads isn't disturbing for you, then just about nothing will be. But then again, I suppose fashion is a dangerous game and all that. Number 5. Kindred. Spider-Man's answer to the Mummy comes in the form of a villain named Kindred, who, despite being introduced in 2006, we still actually know very little about. What we do know though is that he's a scary demon who can control centipedes and resurrect people, which is an unusual set of powers to say the least. We're first told about Kindred when Mysterio reveals he's been ruthlessly tortured by the man-turned-demon, and truth be told, he only gets worse from there. Because despite endlessly trying to kill Spider-Man due to an unspecified desire for revenge or something, Kindred is weirdly nice to the hero during these attempts, calling him by pet names and even defending his girlfriend when he goes off to fight Kraven. With the riddle of exactly who Kindred is or was and exactly what they want, he currently tops the chart of creepy Spider-Man villains and will likely stay there even after the mystery is solved. Number 4. Cadaverous. When a villain has a name that has a word for a dead person in it, you know they're going to be pretty legit. Cadaverous continued this trend by being a legitimately frightening entity, despite having only thus far appeared in 3 issues of the newest Spider-Man series. But that hasn't impeded him, and the cyborg makes a huge impact in the short space of time as the comic repeatedly cuts to him tinkering on robots and humans alike. Creepier yet, Cadaverous may in fact be someone closer to Peter and his son than we think, as the woman in suspended animation he speaks to at the end of the first issue of the 2019 Spider-Man appears to bear a fair resemblance to her, implying that Cadaverous may also be someone with links to the larger Parker family. Give it a while and this big bad might end up even higher on this list. Number 3. Spot. The most disturbing thing about Spot is that, by all regular measurements, he shouldn't be unnerving in any way. The polka dot menace has been a long-time staple of Spider-Man's villains gallery, and for most of that time managed to be entirely unintimidating. But then Spot rocks up in Daredevil, having suddenly transformed into the stuff of legitimate nightmares. He's been harnessed into a machine straight out of Saw that allows his portal spots to be used anywhere, which we are explicitly shown being used for human trafficking, and in a more disturbing moment being used to place drugs in the bellies of pregnant women so they can transport said goods. You'd think this stuff couldn't get worse, but you'd be decidedly wrong, as when Spot is finally freed from his messed up prison, his powers begin to malfunction, resulting in him teleporting inside of himself several times, which leaves him looking like a Silent Hill monster that was ultimately rejected for looking too scary. Number 2. Swarm. On its own, the humble bee is a kind creature. Unlike those sting-happy of the animal world that are wasps, bees are more than happy to leave your skin alone, content to instead consume a small portion of your picnic and then be on their merry way. As such, Swarm earns extra disturbing moments for perverting the sanctity of the wholesome bee, much like Nicolas Cage's Wicker Man film would years later. Swarm, also known as Fritz von Meyer, was actually a Nazi scientist who specialized in deadly poisons and beekeeping. Having fled Germany at the end of World War II, Meyer would discover a rare type of nest that he had never seen before, and naturally decided to mess with them. After angering the hive of hyper-intelligent insects, Fritz would be swarmed by them, and just before his death, his consciousness would transfer into the bees, seemingly simply to traumatize anyone that's reading this comic. So yeah, you've heard of Nazis, you might have even heard of Nazi zombies, but you're not prepared for Nazi bees. Oh, and there's also a universe where this pile of bees becomes the ruler of the universe, so yeah, that's pretty messed up too. Number 1, the 1000. A unique focal point of trauma for any Spider-Man reader has to be that of the supervillain known as the 1000. the 1000 originally went under the name of Carl King, who was one of Peter Parker's vast assortment of school bullies. As such, it's particularly unfortunate that Carl was the only person who saw Peter be bit by the spider that gave him his powers, as it gave the cruel lad one more idea that would allow him to continue to overpower his nerdy opposition, actually eating the same spider that bit Peter. Instead of giving King cool web-swinging powers though, the spider would cause his body to break down into a bunch of similar-looking arachnids, leaving him little more than a bunch of spiders living in a human skin suit. It's shown as pretty much the grossest thing to ever happen in any Spider-Man franchise, if not the grossest thing to ever happen in comics in general. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Are there any more disturbing Spider-Man villains, wackier and more brutal and horrible than this lot? And while you're down there, could you give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to whatculture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.